Look at this logo. Now look at this logo. They are of Singapore's ruling party and Malaysia's largest political party. They look so similar. Crazy, right? Now would it sound even crazier if I told you that the tiny island of Singapore has a large and growing influence on Malaysia's elections? As crazy as it sounds, it's actually true. You see, Singapore has a large influence on Malaysian elections, not because Singaporean politicians actively campaign in Malaysia today, but because of events that occurred almost 100 years ago. To understand Singapore's role in Malaysian politics, we have to go back to World War II, when the Japanese invaded the British colonies of Malaya and Singapore. The Japanese invasion was a watershed moment for people in both colonies. First, it demonstrated that the British colonial masters were not invincible. Second, many Malayans and Singaporeans suffered under Japanese rule. They saw that Britain could not defend her colonies because she herself was under threat from Nazi Germany. Hence, they felt that self-rule would be the best way to take care of themselves. When the British came back after the war, there was a newly ignited spark among both Malayans and Singaporeans to seek independence. The British granted Malaya independence in 1957. However, the British were much more reluctant to grant independence to Singapore. Its Chinese majority population meant that it was then more vulnerable to a communist takeover if it became independent on its own. Singaporean leader Lee Kuan Yew proposed that Singapore merge with Malaya. Such a merger would allow Singapore to free itself from British rule with less fear of a communist takeover, as the Malayan central government could strongly stamp out communism. Besides, the two territories were strongly connected by geography, economics, and ties of kinship. However, Malayan Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman was not agreeable. Malaya had a Malay majority population while Singapore had a Chinese majority population. If Malaya and Singapore were to merge, Malays would be outnumbered by Chinese. The Tunku feared that the special position of the Malays granted by the Malayan constitution would be threatened. The Tunku was, however, agreeable to a merger that would not just include Singapore, but the two territories now known as Sabah and Sarawak. As Sabah and Sarawak had substantial Malay majorities, the Malays would still form the majority in the new federation. All sides were agreeable to this merger, and on 16 September 1963, Malaysia came into existence. Singapore became one of Malaysia's 14 states. There was a mutual understanding between Singapore's ruling party, called the People's Action Party, or PAP, and Malaysia's ruling party, called the United Malays National Organisation, or UMNO, not to interfere in each other's politics. However, this understanding broke down quickly. In 1963, Malaysia's ruling party heavily backed opposition candidates contesting in Singapore state elections. In response, the PAP took part in the 1964 Malaysian federal election. They sent a very small team of 9 candidates to campaign in the Malaysian mainland. Many of these candidates did very badly. In some cases, they only got 3% of the vote. However, the PAP won 1 seat. Their candidate Devan Nair won the seat of Bangsar, near the Malaysian capital of Kuala Lumpur. Nair won by a very slim margin, 2 percentage points. The PAP's decision to take part in the 1964 election shocked UMNO.
Yeah, he crossed the line because he agreed not to contest the 1964 general election. He contested and only won 1 seat. He said he would be better. I'm quite sure he would have been better. But if he had done, the next thing he said, I want to replace you, UMNO.
UMNO leaders were furious that the PAP took part in elections outside of Singapore and feared the PAP would want to form the federal government someday. It was especially upsetting as the PAP ran on a unique platform of racial equality, while UMNO was dedicated to protecting the special position of the Malays. Already high tensions between Singapore and the Malaysian central government increased and soon reached a boiling point. 1 year later, on 9 August 1965, Malaysia expelled Singapore.
There have been differences between the central government and the leaders of the Singapore state government. And these differences take so many forms and are of so many kinds that it has not been possible to resolve them. And so we decided that we must part company.
As the PAP was headquartered in Singapore, its Malaysian branches were disbanded. However, Devan Nair remained in Malaysia's parliament as his seat was on the Malaysian mainland. On the day Singapore was expelled, Nair made a prediction in the Malaysian parliament, which today seems rather prophetic. The fact that Singapore has been ejected, sir, will not mean that the spirit of those who believe in a Malaysia with racial equality has been crushed. I firmly believe and know there are hundreds of thousands of people in this country who will subscribe to the ideals and principles which we had sought to advance here. Acting on his words, Nair quickly formed the Democratic Action Party, also known as the DAP, whose platform was very similar to the PAP, a democratic socialist society with racial equality. Unsurprisingly, their logos were also similar. A few years later, Lee, who was still Singapore's Prime Minister, asked Nair to move back to Singapore, so as not to affect Singapore-Malaysia relations. To quote Lee, the Singapore Cabinet decided that Singapore-Malaysia relations would always be bedevilled if Devan Nair remained as a DAP leader. I persuaded him to come back. However, it was too late to stop what had already started. The DAP continued to win seats at every Malaysian election and grew over time. In 2008, the DAP formed the state government of Malaysia's richest state, Penang. The seats it won in federal parliament deprived the then government of a 2/3 majority required to pass constitutional amendments. 10 years later, in 2018, the DAP captured 20% of the seats in parliament. Its three coalition partners captured 31% of the seats, enabling it to form a simple majority of 51% and topple Malaysia's government for the first time in history. Today, the DAP is the largest party in Malaysia's parliament. It's quite a big achievement for a party that won less than 5% of the vote not too long ago. To me, this story illustrates the butterfly effect, that small actions can have big effects many years down the road. Had Singapore's PAP not taken part in the 1964 Malaysian election, Malaysian politics, and certainly the 2018 election, would have taken a very different course, even though Singapore was subsequently expelled from Malaysia. Until today, the DAP is the only party in Malaysia's parliament that runs on a platform of racial equality. And in Malaysia, it is incredibly difficult to form a successful political party that runs on a platform of racial equality. Famous political leaders experienced their downfall after proposing racial equality, including Onn Jaafar, the first leader of what will become Malaysia's ruling party. Regardless of your politics, this story also beautifully illustrates the impact of fighting for what you believe in. You don't always achieve what you want immediately, or even over a few years, but that doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't important. And it will be equally beautiful if you can smash the like button and subscribe.